So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Shohini Banerjee, SVP with Ipsos' Channel Performance team. Shohini, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. While the pandemic has been raging for a few months now and the economy has opened up, health and safety remains an important and a very relevant topic even today, which is why we wanted to have this webinar. And in fact, as the economy tries to stay open amid all of this chaos, taking an objective look at health and safety measures that various brands are taking is perhaps more important now than ever before. I am Shohini Banerjee, and I'm a Senior Vice President in the Ipsos Channel Performance Group. I've worked in the customer experience and market research consulting space for about a decade now. And as you can imagine, it's a very interesting time to be in this space. Part of my role at Ipsos is to design and lead syndicated studies, and over the past few months, my team at Ipsos has been tracking the implementation of health and safety measures across brands through a syndicated study called the Consumer Health and Safety Index. We shared our initial findings from the study in a webinar similar to this in May. And today we will share some of the best-in-class health and safety measures that we observed across 10,000 plus mystery shops that we have conducted since. But before we get into the results, I did want to spend a few minutes to provide you with a little bit of context in terms of how this index came about. So back in April, when certain states had just started to re-emerge from the first round of shutdowns, clients that we work with across the board asked us the question of, hey, Ipsos, can you tell us what health and safety measures should we focus on to stay open and reopen? What measures will resonate with our customers? What measures will make them feel confident to be in our stores? The honest answer is, at that point, there was not a very good comprehensive answer. And also from our personal experience and observations from across our team, there were two things that became very clear. Number one was that brands needed to take specific steps to ensure customers felt safe while shopping in stores, and not doing so would risk customer defection. It would result in closed locations and would cause permanent damage to the brand's reputation. But the second thing that we also knew was that there was not much clarity on what brands should actually focus on. There was massive inconsistency in what brands were doing across the board. While some brands were taking health and safety seriously, others were not. And even for the brands that had the right intent, implementation of safety measures across the network was inconsistent. And there was no good way to determine if the frontline managers were actually implementing the measures consistently. So we knew that there was a need to implement health and safety, but then there was no good answer to what the key health and safety measures should be and how brands should actually go about measuring their performance on these measures. And thus we came up with the Consumer Health and Safety Index. And the one question that we wanted to answer with this index was, what are the key health and safety measures that brands can take to stay open and stay profitable? So during the course of this webinar, we will share some of the learnings that that we had from the index. The first one is how consumer attitudes towards health and safety are evolving. In this section, we will take a quick look at how these attitudes have evolved through the course of the pandemic. The second question is that we'll be focusing on is, what are top performing industries and brands doing to keep consumers safe? In this section, we will review some observations and photographs from actual mystery shops conducted at some of the top performing health and safety retailers from our index, including Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Costco, Panda Express, and Wells Fargo. This will give you a sense of what best in class looks like, and we will discuss some common themes observed across all of these top performers. The last question that we will look to answer in this webinar is, well, what does the future of health and safety look like, and what can brands do to keep up? So it is very clear, actually, that health and safety is important now and today. But the million-dollar question remains: how long is this going to stay relevant? Which which of these behaviors will actually stick, and therefore, what should brands invest in for the long term? So this is the framework for our webinar. This is what we'll cover over the next 40 minutes or so. But before we get into these questions, I did want to take a quick look at the current landscape of consumer sentiment when it comes to COVID as well as the economy. As of this month, which is September 2020, 2 in 5 people globally do not see life returning to normal for at least another year. Back home in the US, 4 in 5 Americans think that there will be a second round of COVID-19 infections. And in fact, you can see, the signs of that in some Western European countries already, unfortunately. Now, of course, we all think that, this nightmare will be over as quickly as a vaccine gets available. And in fact, there is talk of one getting approved and becoming available in the near future. But lo and behold, 3 in 5 Americans are unlikely to take the vaccine as soon as it gets available. And their primary concern is that I don't trust the vaccine given the rushed approval process it was subjected to. So as you can see, there are legitimate concerns about health and safety which are relevant and which are here to stay for a bit. But despite all of this, 52% Americans believe that we should restart the economy and allow businesses to open and operate as they choose. And this number is growing month on month because people are getting more concerned about their personal financial situation. With these growing concerns about financial well-being, the economy and the retailers operating in the economy must stay open and they must stay profitable. But the only way to do so is if these retailers are operating with the highest health and safety standards. And there really is no other way out if you want to prevent another round of shutdowns. So it is not only the right thing to do for brands to focus on health and safety and to keep focusing on health and safety at this time, but it's also the smart thing to do to stay open and stay profitable. Actually, if you think about it, it is a great opportunity right now to build your brand's loyalty and to communicate that you actually care about your customers and employees. Also, before we get into the 3 questions that I mentioned, I do want to quickly cover some of the methodology behind the Consumer Health and Safety Index, simply because that is the basis of a lot of our presentation today. So we launched this index back in May and ran a first wave in May and June, and then ran another wave in July and August. For both of the waves of the index, we followed a 2-pronged approach. Step 1 was that we surveyed 2,000 Americans to understand their attitudes towards health and safety, and also asked them to rate measures, health and safety measures that they value in store, based on the stores that they might have visited in the recent past. We then deployed, as a step 2, mystery shoppers to go into physical stores to evaluate health and safety measures in store. So this study is unique because it not only measures consumer sentiment, we actually went ahead and evaluated in-store performance through the mystery shops. The study was built with 3 goals in mind. We wanted to help brands measure their performance on health and safety measures. We wanted them to be able to benchmark their performance against competition and cross-industry. And we wanted them to be able to take action and actually move the needle on health and safety by providing them with site-level mystery shop data for their brand. So as I mentioned, we conducted 2 waves. The first wave was conducted in May and June, and we covered 7 different industries, 45 different brands, total of 5,400 plus shops. We included some big brands such as Target, Walmart, Costco, and in big box. Food and beverage had McDonald's, Panda Express, Starbucks, and you can see the full list here. And we also included grocery, home improvements, oil and gas, pharmacy, and the telco sector. Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and Costco were identified as the top 3 performers on health and safety on the index in Wave 1. And they are the ones that demonstrated the most visible and consistent focus on health and safety measures and delivered on the top drivers of return visits to stores. Then, by popular demand, we conducted another wave of this study in July and August, and this time we covered 5 industries. Big box, food and beverage, and grocery were common between the 2 waves, even though we switched up the brands in each of these categories a little bit. By that time, banks were opening up, so we included financial services, and then we switched up oil and gas for convenience stores. In this round of the research, Whole Foods actually retained the overall #1 spot and outperformed everybody else. Wells Fargo and Panda Express were identified as leaders in their own respective industries. So now, coming back to the 3 key questions that I had mentioned that we will address. We'll first focus on the first one, which is how are consumer attitudes towards health and safety evolving? So based on the 2 waves of consumer research that we've conducted, we can conclude that consumer shopping frequency is rising and continues to be focused at essential retailers. Nothing surprising in there. However, it's important to note that trust in retailers remains low, and health and safety continues to be 4 times more important than customer service in store. Now, I've been a CX practitioner for the past decade, and my belief truly is that customer service is kind of what differentiates you in the marketplace. And so just seeing the stat of how health and safety is 4 times more important than customer service is it's a fascinating stat to me. And then the other 2 takeaways that we'll talk about in detail in a bit are that there remains an opportunity to charge a premium for brands that actually get this right, and there are specific measures brands can take to drive consumers back to their stores and build long-term trust. And we'll get into the specifics of that in a minute. So as I mentioned, consumer shopping frequency is rising, but continues to be focused at essential retailers, including grocery, supermarkets, and big box stores. Many are still frequenting gas stations and convenience stores, even if it's not for fueling up as much. It is to grab essentials that they might have previously bought elsewhere. More discretionary retailers, such as fast food restaurants and home improvement stores, have picked up traffic since May, which is when we had conducted the first wave, which also makes sense because those 2 industries definitely in our day-to-day lives we're starting to utilize more. Coffee shops and wireless carriers are the least visited, and they continue to be the least visited. Generally, retailers who implement health and safety protocols are more trusted by consumers. Big box and grocery were the ones where consumers have the highest perception of implementation of health and safety. And in a separate question, we also tried to assess their trust, and those are the 2 industries where the trust is highest. However, as I mentioned earlier, it is concerning to see that 1 in 5 consumers do not trust any brands. This number has slightly gone down since wave 1, but it is still a significant number. 27% Americans are willing to pay a premium for products at retailers that do a superior job with health and safety. 61% Americans would stop shopping at a store that does not take health and safety seriously. And as you can see, the numbers in the brackets are the change since wave 1, and these numbers remain pretty consistent. So there you have it. Focusing on these measures provides an opportunity to charge a premium, but not focusing on these measures results in significant risk of customer defection, which in a hyper-competitive marketplace and a receding economy, that is not something that you want to deal with. You want to try and avoid it. So the question becomes, what are these measures for health and safety that brands can take to make consumers feel safe in store? As part of the consumer research, we asked participants to rate their satisfaction with 25 different health and safety measures, including cleanliness, use of masks, presence of sanitizer, We then conducted a driver analysis, and we looked at two dependent variables, primarily likelihood to return and company trust. And what you see on the screen are essentially the top 5 drivers of return and the top 5 drivers of trust as we measured it in the second wave of our research. You'll notice that the drivers of return in general point to short-term measures that brands can take to drive foot traffic back to the stores. So in-store measures such as social distancing reminders in store, the store entrance opening automatically or without hand contact, plexiglass in store. But if you look at the drivers of trust, those speak to more salient features that customers have come to expect to ensure their personal safety. And this includes the presence of hand sanitizer in store or employees visibly wiping down high-touch surfaces. What is interesting is that what were identified as top drivers of trust in this wave were actually top drivers of return back in May. And this means that these things were new at the time. So this concept of having hand sanitizer present in the store or employees wiping down surfaces, that was new. And, people who did that, had customers coming back to their stores. But now these have become key expectations, core expectations from consumers, and therefore have evolved into drivers of trust versus return. So these are the overall drivers of return and trust, and we also have these models for specific industries. Example, we have a model for grocery, for food and beverage, for big box, etc. And what we did see is that these drivers do vary significantly by industry. For instance, for the convenience store industry, restroom-related drivers show up quite significantly in the top 5 in both trust and return. But, they're not as significant in some of the other industries that we looked at. If you're interested in learning about the industry-specific drivers, please feel free to reach out to us after this webinar. So that concludes the first part of our webinar, which is how consumer health and safety attitudes are evolving, and clearly health and safety is still top of mind for consumers. So now the question becomes, what does best in class look like? What are the top performing industries and brands doing to keep consumers safe? So just a reminder that the next section is all based on actual mystery shops that we conducted as part of the index. And not surprisingly, what we found was grocery and big box retailers topped the two waves of our index. In fact, all 10 of the top 10 brands in wave 1 and 9 out of the top 10 brands in wave 2 were either grocery or big box brands. Food and beverage came in at number 4, and oil and gas and convenience stores they ranked at the bottom of the index in wave 1 and wave 2, respectively. As part of this index, we looked at the exterior, interior, and the restroom in the stores, and grocery and big box pretty much dominated the exterior. The restrooms was dominated by big box. But surprisingly, on the interior of the store, food and beverage brands actually stepped up and performed almost as well, and by primarily focusing on the use of masks and gloves by employees. The one thing that we did note is that the presence of hand sanitizer in store across the customer journey was actually a major fail point across industries. And as we just discussed a few minutes back, it's actually a top driver of trust. So by taking this simple action of placing hand sanitizer throughout your store, that's actually a great way to build on customer trust and customer loyalty and to differentiate your brand. So as I promised, we'll be looking at some actual photos from mystery shops conducted at these brands that were evaluated to be at the top of the index. So let's start with Whole Foods. Whole Foods, as I mentioned, topped the index. They made 44 brands and 32 brands respectively in the 2 waves of the index and were the undisputed number 1. And so what did Whole Foods do right? So the first thing is associates at 100%. And I repeat, 100% of Whole Foods stores visited were observed to be wearing masks properly in the second wave. And this was up from 98% in wave one. So as you can see in these pictures, and we actually looked at multiple pictures submitted by our mystery shoppers, anytime a Whole Foods employee showed up in a photo, they were seen wearing a mask, and they were seen wearing a mask properly. Employees at 76% of Whole Foods stores visited were seen actively cleaning high-touch areas, similar to what you see in the photo in the middle. Now, 76% is not a perfect score by any means, but it is actually almost double of the cross-industry average. So Whole Foods is just doing it better than other brands. Lastly, 44% of the Whole Foods stores visited had sanitizing options such as wipes or hand sanitizer available inside the entrance or at checkout. And you can see a picture on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, even Whole Foods had some room to improve on this metric. It's only 44%, but it's way better than a lot of the other brands in the category as well as overall. It's also interesting to note in this picture how you need to stand on 6 feet markers even to get to this bottle of sanitizer. Overall, you will notice a consistent branding across the board in all of these photos, be it the messaging at the entrance or the consistent masks or the signage inside the store. Everything has a Whole Foods logo on it, and that is important. That branding, that consistency, that message that this is a company-driven initiative is important, and Whole Foods benefits from it. So talking of branding, let's talk about Trader Joe's next. Trader Joe's ranked number 3 in both waves of the index. Now, back in March and April, when the pandemic was just picking up, Trader Joe's was actually heavily criticized in the media for their initial response to health and safety. There were several articles stating how Trader Joe's employees did not feel safe in store and felt like the company wasn't doing enough. But then Trader Joe's decided to respond, and they responded comprehensively. So in the photos from Trader Joe's that you see, you'll notice that they have all the necessary precautions in the form of signage and messaging and distancing, but it is all done in a very Trader Joe's way. It's very on brand. This is a great example of how you can reflect the ethos of your brand while still doing what you need to do in terms of consistency and execution. The other thing to note about Trader Joe's is they scored the highest in our index on enforcing distancing measures through the store journey. So not only did they do this inside the store, but they actually did a really phenomenal job focusing on the exterior of the store as well. So in the picture on the right of your screen, there is a Trader Joe's employee standing at the store entrance. 92% of Trader Joe's stores visited were observed to have employees stand outside the store versus an industry average of just 45%. And the employees that were standing outside were observed in enforcing social distancing measures, managing traffic into the store, or they were seen arranging and wiping down carts. So moving on, we will also quickly cover Costco, which actually ranked number 2 in the first wave and dropped a couple of places to number 5. Costco pretty much followed some of the same standards as we talked about it for Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. But what Costco did really well also is the implementation of barriers of plexiglass inside their stores. 98% of Costco stores visited had plexiglass at checkout, and Costco actually even went ahead and installed plexiglass barriers in the restrooms. And they were probably the only brand to do this at scale. Now, let's look at another industry altogether, which is Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, as I mentioned, topped the financial services industry in the second wave. And again, even if it's a different industry, the flavor of what they did to succeed is very similar to what you just saw for Trader Joe's, Costco, and Whole Foods. 96% of the Wells Fargo locations had a sign requiring customers to wear masks. They implemented all sorts of measures, such as having consistent branded signage outside their locations. Their locations were appointment only. They enabled drive-through services, all pointing to a concerted effort by the company. Wells Fargo actually outdid its competitors on the category of interior cleanliness in terms of employees wiping down surfaces actively. That was one of the reasons why they emerged on top. And as you can see in these pictures, there was hand sanitizer and 6-foot markers inside the store. Lastly, taking you to another industry altogether, which is food and beverage, Panda Express is the one that topped in the second wave on health and safety. And again, different industry, but it's the same concept of having branded signage, consistent messaging, consistent implementation across all your stores. In fact, the little red and white pamphlet that you see in the middle photo, that is actually their COVID operations guide. And if you look at any of their stores, you'll see a copy of this guide in the store. If you look at their website, there's a copy of this guide on their website. There's a video about it. And again, it just shows the consistent, concerted effort made by the brand to get this right. The other thing to note about Panda Express is 96% of the locations visited had employees wearing masks properly. The word properly is important here because there were brands that we visited that had employees wearing masks, but those masks were under their nose, on their chin. But Panda was one brand that actually stood out, and the employees were always seen wearing the mask properly. So, that kind of wraps up the specific examples that we had from brands. And as you can see, this is not rocket science. It really isn't. The key here is consistency. So irrespective of which individual store you go to, you will find consistent messaging with the brand logo on it, consistent implementation of health and safety measures. So this consistent execution is the great separator between the best-in-class brands and the rest of the brands. Another feature that you will find common among these brands is the visibility aspect of it. So it's not just in store, but if you look at their websites, there's a dedicated page that talks extensively about the measures that they have put in place to keep their employees safe and their consumers safe, as well as a lot of press coverage. So if you look up, they have their execs giving interviews in the media, just publishing all the good work and the focus that they're putting behind health and safety, and that visibility matters a lot as well. So in conclusion, getting this right is not rocket science. It's all about picking a few dimensions among the key drivers of return and trust for your industry and simply implementing them consistently and visibly throughout your network. And that wraps the second section of our webinar. Hopefully that gives you a sense of what best-in-class looks like, and the visibility and the consistency aspect of it are the two key takeaways from that section, I would say. Which brings us to the last section of the webinar, which is what does the future of health and safety look like, and what can your brand do to keep up? So let's break it down a little bit. Let's look at the question of what does the future of health and safety look like? Now, we don't have a crystal ball, at least I don't. And therefore, to answer this question, I think we need to look at some principles from behavioral science. So according to behavioral science, behaviors that last or form habits are the ones that have three characteristics. Behaviors that last have consistent cues. For example, if I'm heading out of my house, I grab my wallet, my keys, and these days I also grab a bottle of hand sanitizer and a mask. So this whole process of getting out of my house is the cue, and what I grab is the behavior. Now, long after the pandemic is over, I will continue to go out of my house and I will continue to actually grab my wallet and key. So the question is, will the behavior of picking up the bottle of sanitizer and the mask, will that stick as well? So to answer that question, let's look at the second aspect, which is barriers. Behaviors that last are the ones which have low barriers. Now, these barriers could be physical, they could be economic, they could be social. Now, if we take the example of what I grab when I get out of the house, if I think about sanitizers and masks, well, they are readily available to me now, and they will be readily available to me later. And in fact, they're quite cheap. They're easy to put in my handbag or put on my face. So it really is an easy thing. It's a low barrier behavior, which, makes it a good candidate for this behavior to last. And then the third piece is behaviors that last are the ones which have high reward. So wearing a mask, for instance, it protects me from breathing in contaminated droplets or polluted air. Plus, there is the social gratification of me not only ensuring my safety, but also the safety of people around me. So if I have a cold, the people around me don't have to be uncomfortable about it. So just based on the above, behaviors such as using sanitizer and masks, among others, are likely to persist. And for brands, what that means is the persistent use of masks by employees, or the presence of sanitizers in store will probably be some of the behaviors that do sort of persist even after the pandemic gets over. And this is just two examples. There might be other behaviors such as, standing 6 feet apart, if not 6 feet, but at least standing at a distance, and things like that, will definitely stay. The other behaviors that I can think of are, the use of online and curbside pickup and essentially the behaviors that drive convenience. Those will likely stay as well. Just coming back to the example of masks and taking an example from another part of the world, if you look at some Asian countries such as Japan, China, South Korea, and Thailand, wearing masks was actually quite common there even before COVID hit. This part of the world went through the SARS epidemic in 2002-3, and some of these regions have pretty high levels of air pollution as well. So this behavior of wearing masks stuck through. And again, we don't have a crystal ball, but it is definitely one of the behaviors that has a likelihood of sticking through in our part of the world as well. So in short, I think the takeaway is that some of these behaviors will certainly last, and brands that focus on health and safety now will stand to have a competitive advantage if they focus on the drivers of return, and they will have, they will win over customer loyalty in the long term if they focus on the trust of customers. Many brands recognize this already and are taking action, and I'm going to walk you through some very quick case studies. A major food and beverage brand that bought into our index they decided to place motion-activated hand sanitizer around the entrance of their restrooms. McDonald's is a brand that we have been working with with this index as well, and they use the results to reinforce certain behaviors in store, including the active cleaning of high-touch areas, social distancing, etc. in the store. A leading telecom brand that we're working with decided to deploy monthly audits of all of their stores in the network, and the plan is to keep auditing until a certain level of compliance on health and safety is achieved. All of these efforts, they require significant investments from these brands, but they do believe that there is an ROI, which is why they're making these investments. I also wanted to, bring in some examples from around the world on certain innovations that we're seeing different brands do in terms of health and safety. Scan and Go is a technology that we're definitely seeing sort of in action in the US. One such example is an app which you can download and you can create a shopping list on. It works with certain grocers. So what the app does is it has in-store GPS technology, which will help you determine the shortest route in the store. to pick up your items. It will show you pricing, and it can also help you with digital checkout. So there's no having to interact with anybody in the aisles or at checkout either. Lidl, a grocery store in Germany, has implemented a WhatsApp-based chatbot where you can text the chatbot and it will suggest the quietest hours for you to visit the store based on real-time customer transaction data. Zurich Airport and train stations in Belgium have installed vending machines for masks and gloves. So clearly, these are some very interesting ideas, and some investments that people around the world are making on to ensure health and safety and to prepare for the future. I will wrap with an example of a brand that has made significant investments in health and safety while also being able to drive profitable growth, and that is Lowe's. As a commitment to the safety of their employees and customers, Lowe's revealed that they made an investment of $560 million to support health and safety related efforts. They invested this money in safety protocols in the store, in making sure that their employees have the right pay, bonuses, time off, etc. They also reported their Q2 sales, and according to that report, their Q2 sales went up 30% year on year. So now, of course, the increase in the revenue is definitely driven by higher traffic to stores, but they were able to sustain these levels of traffic and consumer confidence only because of their efforts and investment into health and safety. So imagine if they were not focusing on health and safety, all else being equal, would we as consumers still flock to their stores? The answer is probably not. So we just talked about some specific examples of brands that are doing a great job in implementing health and safety measures, but the reality is there are a lot others that are not. In the 4,700 odd shops that we conducted in the second wave, 3 in 4 stores visited did not provide sanitizer at checkout. 3 in 5 did not have an employee cleaning high-touch surfaces. 3 in 4 did not have restrooms with updated cleaning schedules, and 1 in 5 did not have any social distancing reminders inside the stores, which kind of is unimaginable at this point in the pandemic, but that's those are actual facts. Essentially, just to wrap up this section. Health and safety measures are here to stay, and visible, consistent actions matter and drive ROI, as we saw in the case of Lowe's. But brands still need to do more to keep customers safe in store, as we saw in the final set of stats that I shared. It's in the interest of the brands, it's in the interest of the consumers, it's in the interest of the economy at large. So that actually brings us to the very last part of our presentation. So based on this discussion, if you would like to learn more about performance of your brand or industry, or if you would like to conduct custom health and safety related research, you can purchase the index. We have health and safety driver performance as well as site level data for the 64 brands that you see on the screen. And this is across many different industries. And the results of the study or any custom work that you do with us will help you measure your performance, benchmark your performance against industry, and help you sort of move the needle on health and safety. And we also wanted to show you some actual examples of the deliverables that you will get. As you can see in the reports that you'll get, you'll be able to look at your brand's performance versus the industry on the top drivers of return for your industry. You'll also be able to identify the top performer in your industry for each of the drivers. You'll be able to get your relative ranking on your performance versus competition. You'll be able to understand your performance in detail across various aspects of the store, exterior, interior, and restroom, and you'll be able to benchmark your performance against your industry. And lastly, our team will work with you to create customized recommendations to help you differentiate, to help you move the needle and focus on the right health and safety measures that will, bring you the most return on your investment. So please get in touch if you're interested in the health and safety index. If you are a brand that is already measured in the index, we'll be happy to share your results with you. If you're a brand that is not included in the index, we're happy to conduct custom mystery shops for you and use the index data to benchmark your performance against it. Ultimately, we believe this is information that every organization should not only want, but will need as things come along. And with that, thank you all for your time. We hope that you found the information here valuable. A copy of this presentation will be sent along with a recording of the webinar. And for those of you who have submitted a question, we'll be following up with answers to your questions as well. And yeah, thank you all. Take care and stay safe.
I just really want to thank Shohini for today's really interesting presentation. I learned a lot and saw a lot during her presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We did receive a couple of questions, so to those, we will reply back by email. And if you haven't had a chance to submit a question online yet, then please do reach out to us. We welcome an opportunity to speak with you directly. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.